Okay, well, I want to share with you a few pictures here up on the screens, and I want you to see if you can figure out what all three of these first pictures have in common, okay? So the first one that we have, excuse me, is of a building. This is a building out in Washington, D.C. Okay, the second one, you're going to see something that is on display in that building, okay? And the third one is a soldier, a picture from the Civil War, all right? Now, this soldier here, this is Major General Daniel Sickles. He is actually was best known not for what happened during the Civil War, but for something that happened before the Civil War. Now, Daniel Edgar Sickles, he was a Democrat representing New York's 3rd Congressional District in the House of Representatives. He was a well-known ladies' man, a serial adulterer, and he actually, his wife, he married her when she was just 15 because she was pregnant. Now, he was quite a interesting fella. Philip Barton Key II, he was a friend of Congressman Sickles. He was a United States attorney for the District of Columbia, and he was actually the son of Francis Scott Key, the guy that wrote the poem that eventually became the national anthem. He was known as the handsomest man in Washington. And when Mr. Sickles was not able to accompany his wife to social events, he would ask Mr. Barton to do that for him. Kind of in his stead to serve as her companion for that. Well, interests developed between Mr. Barton and Mrs. Sickles, and this became quite the scandal in Washington. Well, on February 27th, 1859, Sickles looked out the window and saw Key waving a handkerchief from across the square towards their house, which was the signal for Mrs. Sickles that, hey, come on out, let's get together. And so Congressman Sickles stormed out of the house and said, "Key, you scoundrel, you have dishonored my home, you must die." And he pulled out a pistol and shot him several times. And as Key was begging for his life, he pulled out a second pistol and shot him in the chest and killed him. Now, why do I share all of this? Well, because of the fact that this led to a court case that used a unique defense that had never before been used within the United States. It was the plea of temporary insanity. This is something that had never been done here. Now, it had been done over in Great Britain before, but still was relatively a recent thing that had come, is that basically because of the circumstances, a person was in such a terrible state of mind that they were not really responsible for their actions. They weren't thinking straight when they did that. And so actually, Mr. Sickles got off and was not charged with murder in this, or he had been charged, but he was not found guilty of murder, but it was by reason of temporary insanity. Now, why do I share that with you? Because we're going to be talking this morning about somebody who was also dealt with temporary insanity. Now, before we leave, though, Mr. Sickles, I have to explain what those first three pictures are about, okay? The first three pictures, that building was of the Army Medical Museum in Washington, D.C. It's actually been changed now. It looks different, but that's what it looked like back in the day. And Mr. Sickles became a soldier within in the Civil War. And in the Battle of Gettysburg, he disobeyed orders and actually sent his troops forward when he had been ordered to stay back. And in the process of this battle, his leg was shot off by a cannonball. And that leg, after it was amputated, he sent it to Washington, D.C., to the Army medical establishment there, and it was put on display. So that is his actual leg bone. And the funny thing is that on the anniversary of the amputation, he would go every year to visit his leg in the museum on July 2nd, every year. So his temporary insanity, I wonder about the temporary nature of that, right? So now that's the story of Mr. Sickles and his plea of temporary insanity, and how that entered into the American legal system. This morning we are going to look at somebody else who suffered from temporary insanity. You can begin turning to Daniel chapter 4. Now, the reason that he suffered from it was very, very different, but what we're going to see is that God used this in a great way in his life. All right? So we are going to go now, Daniel chapter 4, and I want to read to you verses 1 through 3. Daniel 4, verses 1 through 3 for starters. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, To all the peoples, nation, and men of every language that live on all the earth, may your peace abound. It has seemed good to me to declare the signs and wonders which the Most High God has done for me. How great are his signs and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. So this is a letter. All of chapter 4 is a letter. It's really a press release is what it is, okay? And the White House has their press secretary or an organization will put out a press release. This is for everybody to see. The king said, I want to notify everybody in my entire kingdom. Everybody should know about this. Now, in my public speaking class that I had in college, we were told, when you get up to speak, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. That's what you're supposed to do. So what does the king do? I'm going to tell you here what's going to be the content of my letter. Here's my introduction. This is a statement of the wonders and signs, the miracles that God has done for me. Wow, way to whet your appetite. I love miracle stories, Miracles from the Bible, whether it's like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, or the raising of the dead, or the healing of somebody, or miraculous provision. Of course, I love hearing miracle stories, too, about a person who was healed. My friend Ron was healed when, God just kind of breathed hot air into his lungs, I guess. He was in the hospital, and just suddenly his lungs just opened right up. And or the missionary, Marilyn Laszlo, over in Papua New Guinea, she was going along in the canoe, and her native partners who were with her had forgotten to bring, because there's an outboard motor on this canoe, they had forgotten to bring what they called strong water. Okay, they had forgotten to bring gasoline. So they were downstream. She's like, it's going to take forever for us to get back up. And so they prayed over that engine and started up, and the thing ran the whole way back without gas. Took them all the way back home. Miracles. I love miracle stories. King Nebuchadnezzar says, I got a miracle I want to share with you. Really? Let's see what that miracle is. Okay, so we're gonna keep reading and see what it is. Now, before he had a couple of things that had happened. He had a dream, if you remember in chapter 2. He didn't know what the dream meant, and Daniel came along and was able to interpret it. Not only just interpret the dream, he could even tell the king what his dream was, because God enabled him to do it. That was a miracle. And then last week, we saw that the 3 men who were thrown into the fiery furnace because they wouldn't bow down and worship, but God sent some sort of heavenly figure, the Son of God, an angel, to be with them, and protect them, and bring them out. That was another miracle. But King Nebuchadnezzar says, there's another miracle I want to tell you about. So if we go into chapter 4, we're going to see, as we go into chapter 4, verse 4, we're going to see that he has another dream. Nebuchadnezzar, I was at ease in my house and flourishing in my palace. I saw a dream, and it made me fearful. And these fantasies as I lay on my bed and the visions in my mind kept alarming me. So I gave orders to bring into my presence all the wise men of Babylon, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. Then the magicians, the conjurers, the Chaldeans, the diviners came in, and I related the dream to them, but they could not make the interpretation known to me. But finally Daniel came in before me, whose name is Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God, and in whom is the spirit of the holy gods, and I related the dream to him, saying, O Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, since I know that a spirit of the holy gods is in you, and no mystery baffles you, tell me the visions of my dream which I have seen, along with its interpretation. So this dream, like the one in chapter 2, is alarming, and he doesn't really understand it. But instead of it being a dream of a statue, this is a dream of a tree. Look in verse 10. Now these were the visions in my mind as I lay upon my bed. I was looking, and behold, there was a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. The tree grew large and became strong, and its height reached to the sky, and it was visible to the end of the whole earth. Its foliage was beautiful, and its fruit abundant, and in it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it, and the birds of the sky dwelt in its branches, and all the living creatures fed themselves from it. So the previous dream that he had, the one about the statue, it was just a visual. There was no record for us anyways that he heard anything. There was no words or interpretation or statements that were a part of the dream. This one, he has a dream also of something amazing, but then there is some additional explanation that's given right there in the dream. All right, look at verse 13. I was looking in the visions in my mind as I lay on my bed, and behold, an angelic watcher, a holy one, descended from heaven. He shouted out and spoke as follows: chop down the tree and cut off its branches. Strip off its foliage and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts flee from under it and the birds from its branches. Leave the stump with its roots in the ground, but with a band of iron and bronze around it, in the new grass of the field, and let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let his share be with the beasts of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let a beast's mind be given to him, and let 7 periods of time pass over him. So that last little bit there shows us that this dream, though it is about a tree, in reality is truly about a man. And then in verse 17, we are going to see the purpose for which this dream was given. This sentence is by the decree of the angelic watchers, and the decision is a command of the holy ones, in order that the living may know that the Most High is ruler over the realm of mankind, and bestows it on whom he wishes, and sets it over the lowliest of men. That's the point. The point of all that he just saw is to know that God's in charge. It doesn't matter who's on the throne, who's in the Oval Office, who's behind the governor's desk. God is sovereign. He's the one who puts people in place. He's the one that takes them out. He is the ultimate authority. That's the whole point of this dream. So it doesn't matter if they are a godly person or an ungodly person. It doesn't matter if they inherit the throne or if they're voted in. It doesn't even matter if that person came to power legitimately or if they stole their way in. Okay, and I'm not trying to say one way or the other, but I just know that's what our country's at right now. People arguing back and forth. You know what? That doesn't matter. The fact is God's in charge. And if he puts somebody into office, that's who he wanted in office for his purposes. We need to remember that. Look at Romans 13, verse 1. I believe I've got that up here on the screens. Every person is to be subject to governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. God put them there. God puts them there, and God will remove them when the time is right. We just have to remember that. And that is the main point that he is putting in here, is that he is in charge. So we need to submit to him by submitting to the authorities he has put in place. Now, God will go to great lengths to help us to understand this truth. And with Nebuchadnezzar, we see that he does. He goes to great lengths. Now, the king understood something, but he didn't understand enough to settle his heart. And so he calls in Daniel, and Daniel gives the interpretation. We're going to skip down to verse 22. So referencing this tree, it says, "It is you, O king, for you have become great and grown strong. Your majesty has become great and reached to the sky, and your dominion to the end of the earth. In that the king saw an angelic watcher, a holy one, descend from heaven and saying, 'Chop down the tree and destroy it, yet leave the stump with its roots in the ground, but with a band of iron and bronze around it, in the new grass of the field, and let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let him share with the beasts of the field until 7 periods of time pass over him.' This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, which has come upon my lord the king, that you be driven away from mankind. Your dwelling place be with the beasts of the field, and you be given grass to eat like cattle, and be drenched with the dew of heaven. And 7 periods of time will pass over you, until you recognize that the Most High is the ruler over the realm of mankind, and he bestows it on whomever he wishes. And in that the command was to leave the stump with the roots of the tree, your kingdom will be assured to you after you recognize that it is heaven that rules." So the king is going to go insane. He's going to be driven away from civilization. He's going to live like an animal. Now, this insanity has 2 characteristics. First of all, it is a purposeful insanity. It's purposeful because it needs to get a hold of him and change his perspective. The king, you're thinking about yourself as being the authority. You're thinking that you have put yourself into this position. You're looking at all that you have and you're thinking, that's mine. Look what I've done. I need to get your perspective right, Nebuchadnezzar. So I'm going to take away your sanity. That's the purpose of it. But it is not just purposeful, it is also temporary. Once that purpose has been accomplished, your sanity is going to return. It will be given back to you. Now, we need to act on what we hear. Anytime we go to the scriptures, we have to act on it, not just accumulate the knowledge in our heads. It needs to work its way out in what we do. Now, you guys have heard of a BOGO sale, right? You guys know what I'm talking about with a BOGO? Okay, buy one, get one. I'm seeing some people smiling. You understand what I'm talking about. Okay, you buy one, get one half off, or my favorite is the buy one, get one free. Right? Okay, I buy one, I get one. Well, the king came to Daniel and said, I want you to give me the interpretation. Well, Daniel doesn't just give him an interpretation. He gives him a BOGO. I'm going to give you the interpretation, but I'm also going to give you a word of advice, O king. All right, and that comes in verse 27. Therefore, O king, based on this interpretation, therefore, my advice, may it be pleasing to you, break away now from your sins by doing righteousness, and from your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor, in case there may be a prolonging of your prosperity. That took guts. To go to the king and say, you're a sinner, you need to repent. But Daniel does. He confronts Nebuchadnezzar and says, Nebuchadnezzar, I want what's best for you. You need to listen to this. God is speaking to you. It's a hard truth. Now, is this the miracle that Nebuchadnezzar talked about at the beginning of his letter here? Is this the miracle he's saying, that I had another dream and Daniel was able to interpret it? No, that's not necessarily it. I mean, it's a part of the story, but there's more to come. Verse 17 gave us a dream that was a sentence pronounced. Verse 28 is the gavel that's falling. And you hear that gavel hit, and verse 28 says, and all this happened to Nebuchadnezzar the king. Everything that was just predicted happens. So let's read about how this happens. 12 months later, verse 29, he was walking on the roof of the royal palace in Babylon. The king reflected and said, is this not Babylon the Great, which I myself have built as a royal residence by my might, by the might of my power, and for the glory of my majesty? Well, while the word was still in the king's mouth, a voice came from heaven and said, King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is declared, sovereignty has been removed from you, and you will be driven away from mankind. Your dwelling place will be with the beasts of the field, and you will be given grass to eat like cattle. And 7 periods of time will pass over you until you recognize that the Most High is the ruler of mankind and bestows it on whomever he wishes. Immediately the word concerning Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled. He was driven away from mankind and began eating grass like cattle. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair had grown like eagle's feathers and his nails like bird's claws. Wow. He lost it. He lost his mind. He began behaving like an animal. He lived like an animal. And it says for 7 periods of time. Now, what exactly was the 7 periods of time? We're not really told. Chances are it was years, at least months, because you're going to need time for your nails and hair to grow, to become long like that. But for a long extended 7 periods of time, he lived like that. Now, this dream was not just about a tree that was chopped down. It was also about a stump that was left in the ground. You remember that? That part of the dream? Okay. Now, we had in our front yard a diseased ash tree. And so we had to chop it down. Now, my neighbor came over with his chainsaw. I say, he helped me chop it down. He really did it for me. Okay. And he whacked that thing down, and it left a stump in the ground. Now, in the story here, there's these metal bands around it, and I haven't researched it enough to know if that was more about binding him to these 7 years or if it was protecting him during the 7 years. But that stump was to remain because that stump was going to regenerate. Now, with this stump in my yard, I tried to get rid of it here. Okay, you can see that stump that picture shows that I really worked to get rid of this. He chopped it down nice and low, but then I took and I drilled holes in this, and I was told that if you pour vegetable oil in there, let it soak in for a while, you can light the thing on fire, and it will help to burn the stump down. Well, that didn't really work real well, and especially because the neighbor called the fire department on me, so I had to stop. And so I was left with this stump. But if you notice off to the side, what happened? Yes, it started to sprout back up. Actually, there was a whole bunch of these. I cut off most of them. But that tree is starting to regenerate because it was not content to just stay there. I did everything I could to kill that thing. Okay? We cut it. We tried to burn it. No, it didn't work. I even hacked at it with a machete, just seeing if I could whack that thing in. There's no way. I'd have to grind it out, and I was too cheap to pay for it. Couldn't get rid of that stump. And so now it is starting to grow back. Where there seems to be no chance of life, God can still bring about life. When there seems to be no chance of a comeback, there is still a chance if that is what the Lord's will is. And I'm guessing that somebody here needs to hear that this morning. Somebody is having to hear that you might think that all is lost, there's absolutely no way, it's been too long, it can't. It can't come back, it can't revive. God can't revive it, if that is his will. And that's what he predicted here, that there will be a comeback for the king. Now let's look at verse 34. But at the end of that period, those 7 periods of time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my reason returned to me. And I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, but he does according to his will in the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and no one can ward off his hand or say to him, what have you done? At that time my reason returned to me, my majesty and my splendor were restored to me for the glory of my kingdom, and my counselors and my nobles began seeking me out. So I was reestablished in my sovereignty, and surpassing greatness was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are true and all his ways are just, and he is able to humble those who walk in pride. He was a proud man, but God humbled him. He gave him back his sanity. He gave him back his splendor. He gave him back his sovereignty over the kingdom. He even gave him back his standing in the eyes of all of his nobles. I mean, typically I would think most people are not going to trust somebody who's been insane for 7 years. But yet he was restored back to his place because that's what God wanted for him. But God had to get him straightened out first. Now, I want you to look back at verse 2 to something I completely missed when I first read this story. All right? Verse 2 of this chapter. It says, it seemed good to me to declare the signs and wonders which the Most High God has done for me. I would have said, God has done this to me. If I lose my sanity, I lose my kingdom. If I lose all that stuff, I'm going to say God's done that to me. But on the back side of it, he says, no, God has done this for me. This was a gift for Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was given a BOGO, right? I'm going to give you your kingdom. Well, God took it all away first. But then when God gave it back, I'm going to give you back your kingdom, your position, your sanity. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm also going to give you humility. I am going to give you a right perspective. Because he was viewing that wrongly. He was falsely seeing something as supportive, as strong when it wasn't. He was seeing his own might, his own wisdom, his own abilities. But those things were not what put him there. It was God who put him there. And if you continue standing on that which will not support you, one day it is going to give way. My house has an attic. I'm thinking most of you probably have an attic as well. When I go up into the attic, it's not a finished space. I have to hunch over and kind of crawl along on the ceiling joist, rafter thingies, whatever, those boards going across. I don't know what you call them. I got to make sure that I stay on those because there is a floor underneath those from up there. But what is that? That's the drywall on my ceiling. If I try to stand on that, what's going to happen? I'm going to end up in my living room, right? I'm going to fall through because of the fact it will not support me. If we stand on our own wisdom and might and charisma, our own abilities, eventually that is going to give way. It is going to fall out from underneath us. And God, in his grace, saw Nebuchadnezzar walking in pride and said, I'm going to get a hold of this guy. I want him for myself. I want his honor for me. Now, didn't seem like whatever happened in chapter 2 didn't really stick with him. That vision of the gold head on the statue didn't seem to help. The fiery furnace incident, and God delivered those 3 out of there. Well, whatever happened there, it didn't seem to stick because that pride came back. Even Daniel's dream, or the dream that Daniel interpreted for him here of the tree, it took 12 months later. And God finally said, okay, I need to show you that what you're standing on is not going to hold you. You need to acknowledge me. So what do we do with this? Well, look beneath your feet. What are you standing on? Are you standing on something that is not going to support you? Are you standing on your own abilities, your own resources, your own wisdom, your own fill in the blank? Or are you acknowledging that everything that I have is from God? His kingship was from the Lord. His splendor, his security, even his ability to think straight was from the Lord. God can take any of those away if that's what it's going to take to humble us so that we will realize who he is. He went through a time of temporary loss, temporary insanity. But what he lost was used as God's means of transforming him. What have you lost? And how has God used it to transform you? What might you be in danger of losing because you're depending on it too heavily? And God would say, I need to take that from you so that you will turn your eyes toward heaven and realize it is I who provide. It is I who make you secure. It is I who give you the ability so that he receives all of the glory. Now, this is all Old Testament here. I want to give you two passages from the New Testament that are going to give you something to hold on to when you head into a time of loss. The first one, Romans 8:28. We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, or he causes all things to work together for good to those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. All things. It doesn't matter if it's pleasant or painful, if it's good or seemingly bad, even if it's our own sinful choices that we have made, God is able to take all of those things and orchestrate it together for our good. 7 years of insanity. Most people would say that's not good, but God used it for good in the life of Nebuchadnezzar. And God can use the seemingly bad things in our lives to do that as well. Health challenges, relational challenges, economic fallout, political upheaval. God will use it all. If you love him and you have been called by him, he will turn it around into something good eventually. Hold on to that promise. God can take trash and he can turn it into treasure. He can take our bad circumstances and turn it into something good. Philippians chapter 3, verses 7 and 8. These will be our last verses for this morning. Philippians 3, 7 and 8, Paul is looking at the things that he has suffered. But whatever things were gain to me, those things I have counted as loss for the sake of Christ. More than that, I count all things to be lost in view of the surpassing value of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and count them as rubbish so that I may gain Christ. I can look at everything that was in the credit column of my bank statement, and I can put it all into the negative. As long as I've got Christ in the positive, I am a rich man. I have more than all that I need. Whatever things that he would have counted on, and he's listed those in other places, his righteousness, his education, his zeal, all the things he'd done, forget it. I can put those in the debt column. If I've got Christ in the credit column, I've got all that I need and more. I can count everything a loss. Because in fact, really, they're not losses. They're trades. Every loss that you have suffered, if God is bringing about good through it, it's a trade. I surrendered a little bit so that I can gain a whole lot more. I have given up or had taken away from me, but you know what? God is giving me more in return. And the fact that we know that this life is not all that there is and that there is a life to come, all the losses we endure now are going to pale in comparison with all the wonderful that God has for us on the other side. It's a trade, but it is a trade that is worth it. So as the losses come, we can look at them and say, you know what, God, I can receive this loss from you because I know that it is good on the other side. So my challenge for us is twofold, and I'll invite our musicians to come and prepare to lead us in our closing song. The twofold challenge is this. One, are you depending on something that is not dependable? Are you depending on something that is less than God? Are you relying on, or viewing, I should say, are you viewing the good, the strong, the things that are together in your life as somehow I have accomplished them? Or are you seeing them as gifts from God that need to be stewarded and used as in service to him? So are you viewing things rightly? And I guess really the second one is along the same lines. The losses you have suffered already, view them in light of eternity, and that God is using them to bring about good for you and for others, and he's using them to bring about glory for himself. So just ponder that as we sing this closing song, and whatever God lays on your heart, do business with him in prayer.
I love to tell the story of unseen things above, of Jesus and his glory, of Jesus and